What would you do if a gun was pressed to your head and you were handed a vial of deadly poison? Clara, a simple Boston baker, was forced to assassinate the city's most feared crime lord. But her split-second shocking decision didn't just save his life, it changed the underworld forever. The air inside the Gilded Crumb always smelled of vanilla toasted almonds and the faint, comforting tang of sourdough. For Clara Keogh, her bakery on the corner of Hanover Street in Boston's North End was a sanctuary. It was a world entirely within her control, where exact measurements yielded predictable, beautiful results. Butter, sugar, flour, and heat, these were the laws of physics she trusted. But there is no recipe for survival when the city's violent underbelly kicks down your door. It was 10 o'clock on a rain-slicked Tuesday night. Clara was wiping down the display cases, the soft hum of the refrigeration unit, the only sound in the empty shop. The bell above the door didn't chime. The glass was simply shattered inward by the butt of a heavy Glock pistol. Clara gasped, dropping her rag as 3 men in dark overcoats shoved their way into the warmth of the bakery. The Boston rain blew in behind them, bringing the smell of wet asphalt and impending violence. Between 2 of the towering men, a smaller figure was dragged by his collar, his face bruised into a mosaic of purple and red. "Leo!" Clara screamed, rushing forward, but the third man, a broad-shouldered enforcer with a scarred jaw, stepped in her path, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. Her younger brother spat a mouthful of blood onto the checkered tile floor. "Clara, I'm sorry. I swear I didn't mean for it to get this far." From the shadows of the doorway, a 4th man entered. The streetlights caught the sharp planes of his face and the expensive sheen of his tailored charcoal suit. This was Victor Moretti. Even a civilian like Clara knew the name. Victor was the ruthless underboss of the Moretti crime family, a man whose ambition was drowning the city's docks in blood. "Ms. Keogh." Victor said, his voice a smooth, terrifying purr that seemed entirely out of place amidst the shattered glass. "Your brother here has an expensive hobby. Underground poker, sports betting. He owes me $400,000, a debt that was due last Friday." "I don't have that kind of money," Clara said, her voice trembling but her chin raised. "We run a bakery. Take the ovens, take the shop." "I don't want your sourdough, Clara." Victor interrupted, stepping closer. He reached out, running a gloved finger over the polished glass of the pastry case. "What I want is access, and as fate would have it, you are the only person in Boston who can give it to me." Clara stared at him, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. "Access to what?" Victor gestured to one of his men who released Leo. Her brother crumpled to the floor, gasping. "Tomorrow night," Victor began, pacing slowly, "Dominic Russo is hosting his 35th birthday gala at his private estate in Weston. He's a paranoid man, Dominic. He screens his guests, he screens his staff, and he certainly screens his food. But he has one known weakness." Victor stopped smiling, a cold, reptilian smile. "He has an absolute obsession with your signature almond amaretto sponge cake. He ordered it under a fake name 3 months ago, and rumor has it he's demanded it for his birthday dinner. The caterers have already contracted you." Clara swallowed hard. It was true. A massive order had come in from a high-end concierge service. She had spent the last 2 days prepping the intricate sugarwork and sourcing the finest Sicilian almonds. She had no idea it was for the head of the Russo syndicate, the most powerful and lethal mafia boss on the East Coast. Victor reached into his coat and produced a small velvet-lined box. He snapped it open. Inside rested a tiny glass vial filled with a clear, viscous liquid. "This," Victor whispered, "is a concentrated synthesized derivative of ricin and digitalis. Colorless, odorless, It mimics a massive, catastrophic heart attack. Within 20 minutes of ingestion, Dominic Russo will be dead, and the medical examiner will write it off as natural causes. Clara backed away, her hands flying to her mouth. No. No, I am a baker. I'm not a killer. I won't do it. Victor's eyes deadened. He didn't yell. He merely nodded at the enforcer. The man drew his weapon, racked the slide with a terrifying metallic clack, and pressed the barrel directly to the back of Leo's head. Leo squeezed his eyes shut, a pathetic sob tearing from his throat. You misunderstand our dynamic, Clara, Victor said softly. This isn't a negotiation. You will go to the Russo compound tomorrow. You will bake that cake. You will empty this vial into the amaretto syrup before you glaze it. If Russo dies, I forgive the debt, and you and Leo disappear to Europe with 100 grand in a duffel bag. If you refuse, or if you tip him off. Victor leaned in his breath, smelling of expensive scotch and peppermint. I will have my men skin your brother alive in this very room, and I will make you watch before I burn this bakery to the ground with both of you inside. He reached out, grabbing Clara's trembling hand, and pressed the cold glass vial into her palm, folding her fingers over it. Bake a good cake, Miss Keogh. Your brother's life depends on it. The Russo estate in Weston was less a home and more a fortress, disguised as a Gilded Age mansion. Iron gates swung open as the catering vans arrived in the torrential downpour the following afternoon. Security was suffocating. Men with earpieces and tactical bulges beneath their tuxedos checked every crate of produce, every bag of flour, and every piece of identification. Clara stood in the rain, clutching her heavy equipment bag. Hidden deep within the false bottom of her thermos was the vial Victor had given her. Her entire body felt leaden, hollowed out by a sleepless night of terror and weeping. She had left Leo, locked in the bakery's basement office, watched over by one of Victor's silent, armed goons. The ultimatum was absolute. Keogh Clara. A towering guard barked, checking a clipboard. He patted her down with professional, impersonal efficiency, his scanner sweeping over her bags. It beeped green. He hadn't found the glass vial. You're cleared. Kitchen is down the hall, last double doors on the right. Don't wander. The kitchen of the Russo estate was a culinary marvel, a sprawling expanse of brushed stainless steel copper pots hanging from iron racks and massive roaring commercial ovens. The head chef, a stressed-out Frenchman, barely glanced at her as he shouted orders at a dozen line cooks. Pastry station is in the back corner, he yelled over the din. You have 3 hours until the dessert service. Do not get in my way. Clara retreated to her isolated corner. She mechanically unpacked her tools, the offset spatulas, the piping bags, the perfectly measured containers of imported almond flour sugar, and organic eggs. The physical act of preparing to bake was muscle memory, a grounding ritual that momentarily pushed the sheer horror of her reality to the edges of her mind. But then her fingers brushed the cold glass of the vial hidden in her apron pocket. Murder. She was going to commit murder. She cracked the eggs, her hands shaking so badly she dropped a shell into the bowl. She fished it out, tears stinging her eyes. She thought of Leo. Foolish, reckless Leo, who had practically raised her after their parents died, who had taken out a second mortgage to buy her the commercial oven she needed to start her business. He was an idiot, but he was her blood. She couldn't let Victor butcher him. As the sponge cakes went into the oven, filling the corner with the intoxicating aroma of toasted nuts and vanilla, the frenetic energy of the kitchen suddenly flatlined. The shouting stopped. The clattering of pots ceased. Clara looked up from the bowl of mascarpone she was whipping. A man had entered the kitchen. He didn't look like the monsters in the movies. He wasn't dripping in gaudy gold chains or scowling like a thug. Dominic Russo was breathtakingly striking, possessing a quiet, devastating gravity. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo, tailored so perfectly it looked like armor. His dark hair was swept back, silvering slightly at the temples, and his eyes, a piercing, intelligent amber, swept over the frozen kitchen staff. "Don't stop on my account, chef," Dominic said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that carried effortlessly across the large room. "I just came down for a quiet moment. The politicians upstairs are giving me a headache." "Of course, Mr. Russo," the head chef stammered frantically, gesturing for his staff to resume cooking, though the volume remained noticeably muted. Dominic didn't stay near the main line. He walked slowly toward the back corner, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on Clara. She froze, the whisk heavy in her hand. This was the man she was supposed to kill, the ruthless syndicate boss who allegedly controlled the judges, the police, and the ports. He stopped on the other side of her marble prep counter. He looked down at the pale yellow cakes cooling on the racks, then up to her face. "You're Clara," he said softly. It wasn't a question. "I am," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic offered a faint, tired smile. "I used to go to the Gilded Crumb when I was a kid. Your father Thomas, he always gave me an extra cannoli when my old man wasn't looking. Said I was too skinny for an Italian boy." Clara blinked, thrown entirely off balance. You knew my father." "My father was a harsh man," Dominic said, his amber eyes dropping to the cooling cakes, a shadow passing over his handsome features. "Your father's bakery was one of the few places in the neighborhood that felt safe. When I heard you took it over, I had my people order a cake a few months ago. It tasted exactly like my childhood. Thank you for coming tonight. I know my security can be intense." He reached out casually, swiping a finger through the bowl of unpoisoned mascarpone frosting. He tasted it, closing his eyes briefly. Perfect. Not too sweet. Clara stared at him. Her chest tightened painfully. Victor had painted Russo as a rabid dog that needed to be put down, but standing here smelling of expensive cedar cologne and speaking with quiet reverence about her dead father Dominic seemed undeniably tragically human. He was a criminal, yes. He had likely done terrible things. But he was treating her with profound respect. If Russo dies, Victor takes over the city, Clara realized with sudden, sickening clarity. Victor who threatened innocent bakers. Victor who held guns to the heads of crying men. If Victor became the undisputed king of Boston, the streets would drown in blood. And worse, Victor would never leave a loose end. He wasn't going to let Clara and Leo go to Europe. The moment Russo's heart stopped, Victor's men would execute them both. Dead women tell no tales. "Is everything all right, Clara?" Dominic asked, his brow furrowing, as he noticed the pallor of her skin and the frantic shallow rise and fall of her chest. He stepped closer, genuine concern in his eyes. "You look like you're going to faint. Do you need water?" I'm fine," Clara choked out, stepping back, her hand instinctively flying to her apron pocket, pressing against the deadly vial. "Just the heat of the ovens." Dominic studied her face for a long, agonizing second. His eyes were too sharp. She felt as if he were looking straight through her skin and reading the sins written on her bones. "Take a break if you need it. No cake is worth collapsing over." He offered her one last respectful nod before turning and walking out of the kitchen, his bodyguards melting out of the shadows to follow him. Clara was left alone in the corner, the heat of the ovens radiating against her back. The 3 hours evaporated. It was time. The towering cake was assembled. 3 tiers of flawless, airy almond sponge, layered with rich mascarpone and dusted with crushed pistachios. The final step was the amaretto drizzle. It was meant to be poured over individual slices just before serving to keep the sponge perfectly moist. Clara stood at the counter, an ornate silver gravy boat filled with the sweet, amber-colored amaretto syrup resting in front of her. Her hands trembled violently as she pulled the glass vial from her pocket. She popped the cork. The liquid inside looked like water. Just a few drops. That was all it took. Pour it, a voice in her head screamed. Pour it and save Leo. If you pour it, you become Victor's weapon, another voice whispered. And Victor will kill you both anyway. Dessert service in 5 minutes, the maitre d' snapped, bursting into the kitchen. Ms. Keogh, is the Rousseau cake ready? The boss wants his slice served at the head table immediately. Clara looked at the silver pitcher. She looked at the vial. She thought of Dominic's sad smile, remembering her father. She thought of Victor's cold, dead eyes. She had to make a choice, and she was out of time. The kitchen clock ticked with deafening volume each second, hammering against Clara's skull. She looked at the silver gravy boat of amaretto syrup, then at the small, deadly vial in her hand. Victor had lied. She knew it in her bones. If Dominic Rousseau died tonight, Victor would seize the Boston Underworld. He would never leave a witness who could tie him to the assassination. The moment Rousseau's heart stopped, Victor's men in her bakery's basement would put a bullet in Leo's head, and they would come for her next. She uncorked the vial. A sharp, bitter scent like burnt almonds and ozone briefly cut through the sugary air. With a trembling hand, Clara walked to the heavy-duty industrial sink in the corner. She turned on the scalding hot water and inverted the glass vial. The poison vanished down the drain, washed away into the city's labyrinthine sewers. She was a baker, not a murderer, but Victor's threat still hung over her brother's head like a guillotine. She needed a miracle. She needed Dominic Rousseau alive, but Victor had to believe he was dead long enough for Clara to find a way to save Leo. Clara rushed to her supply bag. She tore a small, thick square of parchment paper from her baking roll. Grabbing a food-safe edible ink pen she used for cake decorations, she wrote in tight, frantic letters, "Do not eat. Poison threat. Moretti has my brother, hostage. Fake your death, or we both die." She folded the parchment and slid it beneath the intricate gold doily on the main serving platter. She placed the massive, pristine slice of the almond amaretto sponge cake directly on top, drenched in the pure, untainted syrup. "Is it ready?" the maitre d' demanded, reappearing at her station. "Yes," Clara breathed, stepping back. "It's perfect." The server whisked the silver platter away. Clara wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and followed at a distance, pushing through the swinging doors just enough to peer into the grand dining room. The ballroom was a masterclass in opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the tables. Clara recognized faces she had only seen in newspapers or on television. State Senator William Higgins was mid-laugh with a notorious shipping magnate, and Judge Harrison from the Superior Court was swirling a glass of deep red wine. This wasn't just a mob gathering. It was a nexus of Boston's absolute power. Dominic sat at the head table, flanked by 2 massive bodyguards. As the waiter placed the cake before him, the room quieted, a murmur of anticipation rippling through the guests. Dominic picked up his heavy silver fork. He looked down at the cake. From her vantage point, Clara watched as he paused. His sharp, amber eyes had caught the unnatural edge of the parchment paper protruding from beneath the doily. With smooth, deliberate casualty, Dominic shifted the plate, his thumb brushing the paper. He didn't look down immediately. He took a sip of his espresso, then glanced at the note. For a fraction of a second, the muscles in Dominic's jaw feathered. He didn't look around the room. Instead, his gaze lifted and shot straight toward the kitchen doors. Across 60 feet of crowded ballroom, his eyes locked onto Clara's terrified face, peering through the glass portal. He held her gaze. He gave a microscopic nod. Dominic raised his fork, loaded it with a piece of the cake, and brought it to his mouth. He chewed slowly, closed his eyes in apparent culinary bliss, and swallowed. "Magnificent," he said loudly, his deep voice carrying over the music. "My compliments to the chef." 10 seconds passed. Clara held her breath. Suddenly Dominic dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the fine bone china. He grasped his chest, his face contorting in an agonizing grimace. With a violent jerk, he stood up, knocking his heavy oak chair backward. "Dominic!" one of his lieutenants yelled, leaping up. Dominic gasped, clutching his throat, and pitched forward. He crashed into the table, shattering glasses and sending centerpieces flying before collapsing onto the marble floor. He began to convulse, his eyes rolling back. He's a terrifyingly good actor. Clara thought her heart threatening to crack her ribs. Pandemonium erupted. Women screamed. Men shouted. "The boss is down. Get a medic. Lock down the estate. Nobody leaves." Amidst the chaos, a tall man in a tailored grey suit, Arthur Pendleton, Dominic's own chief of security, stepped forward, drawing a customized Glock. But he didn't point it outward. He aimed it directly at Dominic's convulsing body. "Stand down!" Arthur roared at the loyal bodyguards. "Russo is dead. Moretti sends his regards. The regime changes tonight." At least 6 other men in the room drew weapons, siding with Arthur. The betrayal was staggering. Victor hadn't just relied on Clara, he had bought off Dominic's inner circle to ensure the coup succeeded. Arthur took a step closer to Dominic, leveling his gun to put a final unnecessary bullet into the boss's head. "Nothing personal, Dom." Dominic's eyes snapped open. He didn't rise. From the floor, moving with the terrifying speed of a striking viper, Dominic drew a concealed Sig Sauer from his ankle holster. He fired twice. Arthur's chest exploded in a mist of crimson, and he crumpled to the floor, dead before he hit the marble. "Kill them!" Dominic roared, rolling behind an overturned banquet table as the room erupted into a deafening firefight. Clara screamed, dropping to the floor of the kitchen as bullets shattered the glass doors above her, raining jagged shards onto her back. The sound was apocalyptic, the concussive boom of handguns mixing with the shattering of crystal and the terrified shrieks of Boston's elite diving for cover. Strong hands suddenly grabbed Clara by the collar of her chef's coat, hauling her up and dragging her backward into the depths of the kitchen. It was Dominic. His tuxedo jacket was torn, his eyes blazing with absolute unhinged adrenaline. "Move!" he barked, shoving her through a heavy steel door marked "Staff Only," and slamming it shut, locking the deadbolt just as heavy caliber rounds punched through the drywall behind them. Dominic dragged Clara down a narrow service corridor, their footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. He punched a code into a reinforced keypad, and a hidden door hissed open, revealing a stark, heavily armored panic room, lined with surveillance monitors and weapon racks. He shoved her inside and sealed the vault door. The sudden suffocating silence of the room was a jarring contrast to the war zone upstairs. Clara collapsed against the cold steel wall, sliding down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. She was hyperventilating, tears streaking through the flour and dust on her cheeks. Dominic didn't immediately check on her. He moved to the comms station, his hands flying over the controls. He grabbed a heavy satellite radio. "Echo team, this is actual..." Dominic commanded his voice, cold, steady, and terrifyingly authoritative. "We have a rat infestation in the ballroom. Clean it up. No prisoners." He switched channels. "Strike Team Alpha. I need immediate deployment." Dominic turned, looking down at Clara. The hard, violent lines of his face softened infinitesimally. "Where is your brother, Clara? The bakery." She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "The basement office. Victor has a man with him. He said if you didn't die tonight, they would skin Leo alive." Dominic keyed the radio again, his amber eyes locked on her. He issued orders with chilling precision. "Target the Gilded Crumb, Hanover Street, North End. Objective rescue the civilian hostage, Leo Keogh. Secondary objective, capture Victor Moretti alive. Execution breach through the old Prohibition-era smuggling tunnels beneath the adjoining deli. Silent entry. Lethal force authorized on all hostiles." Dominic dropped the radio on the steel desk and walked over to Clara. He crouched down, ignoring the blood seeping from a superficial graze on his forearm. He reached out his large, rough hands, gently cupping her face, forcing her to look at him. "Breathe," he commanded softly. "Look at me, Clara. Breathe." She sucked in a ragged breath, drowning in the intensity of his gaze. He smelled of cordite, expensive cedar cologne, and masculine sweat. "You dumped the poison," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I couldn't do it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm not a killer, but I just signed my brother's death warrant." "No, you didn't," Dominic corrected fiercely, his thumbs brushing the tears from her cheeks. "You gave me the intel I needed to flush out the traitors in my own house. You walked into a slaughterhouse, stared the devil in the eye, and chose mercy. You saved my life tonight, Clara. Victor will kill him. Victor Moretti is a dead man, walking." Dominic promised the absolute certainty in his tone, sending a shiver down her spine. "Nobody touches what is mine, and tonight you and your brother fall under my protection." "Do you understand?" Clara stared at him. The implication was heavy, hanging in the air between them. Protection from a Mafia boss wasn't a gift. It was an invisible chain. It meant stepping out of the light and into the shadows of his world. But looking into Dominic's eyes, seeing the fierce, unyielding gratitude burning there, she realized she had already crossed the threshold. The radio crackled to life, breaking the tense intimacy. "Boss, strike Team Alpha. Package is secured. The brother is banged up but alive. We caught Moretti trying to flee out the back alley. We have him." Clara let out a choked cry of relief, her forehead dropping onto Dominic's chest. He didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms tightly around her, holding her against him, as she finally let the adrenaline crash over her. "Bring Moretti to the warehouse," Dominic said into the radio over Clara's shoulder, his voice dropping an octave into something dark and utterly merciless. "I'll deal with him personally." 1 month later. The bell above the door of the Gilded Crumb chimed, cutting through the scent of toasted almonds and vanilla. Clara looked up from the pastry display. The glass door was fixed. The shattered remnants of that terrifying Tuesday night were gone. Leo was upstairs in his apartment, nursing a broken rib, but alive and completely free of his gambling debts. Victor Moretti had simply vanished, a ghost story whispered by nervous thugs on the docks. Dominic Russo walked into the bakery. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo today. He wore a dark, tailored peacoat over a charcoal sweater, looking effortlessly commanding. 2 massive men in suits waited outside on the sidewalk, their eyes scanning the street. Dominic approached the counter. The quiet gravity of his presence made the bustling city outside fade away. He looked at Clara, his amber eyes, holding a warmth that he reserved solely for her. "I have a craving," Dominic said, a slow, devastating smile spreading across his handsome face. Clara felt the familiar, dangerous flutter in her stomach. She wiped her hands on her apron, leaning slightly over the glass case. "Is that so, Mr. Russo? What can I get you?" Dominic reached over the glass, his hand covering hers. The heat of his touch sent a jolt straight to her heart. "Everything," he murmured. I want everything." Clara smiled back, tangling her fingers with the most dangerous man in Boston. She had traded one kind of peace for another, but as she looked at the man whose life she had saved, she knew she wouldn't change a single ingredient. Did Clara's shocking choice leave you breathless? If you loved this intense Mafia romance drama and want more pulse-pounding, real-life inspired stories of danger, betrayal, and forbidden love, hit that like button right now. Share this video with your friends who can't resist a good plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our thrilling tales. Drop a comment down below. Would you have saved the dark Mafia boss?